Today is September the 28th, 29th?
It is.
28th.
It's 28th.
September 28th, 2007. We're here in the Angie DeBow room at OSU campus to talk with Neysa Eberhard.
Yes.
She was a librarian for the curriculum materials librarian back in 1969 to 73. Is that correct?
73, correct.
Mm-hmm. And this is part of the O State Stories Oral History Project that the library is conducting. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. And it's Angie DeBow is certainly an appropriate room to be in. Mm-hmm. She was quite a lady.
She was. I'm learning that
yes.
too.
Yes.
Okay, let's start by having you tell us a little bit about your childhood, where you're from, and
well, I was born in the middle of the sagebrush territory in western South Dakota. And at the age of 15, my mother died, and I moved to Kansas to live with her sister and family. And so I'm pretty much a Kansan since then, except for the 4 years that I was in Oklahoma. And one of the things I remember is how welcomed I was and how people, I was given a little brochure about Andrew Jackson that was supposed to give me an emblem of being a citizen of Oklahoma. And I couldn't find it to wear it today, but.
Well, did you have siblings?
No, I was an only child, but my two cousins that I grew up with me are like sisters. In fact, they consider me sisters, and their children consider me their aunt and all that sort of thing.
Well, how did you choose librarianship?
Well, it was kind of an accident. When my son started the first grade, the superintendent in our school system had been asking me to come back and teach, and I wasn't ready to until he started school on a so-called full-time basis. So I was teaching 6th grade language arts and science because I happened to have a K-12 certification, and they needed a librarian and an English teacher, and I was a speech English major, really. So they paid my way to go to school that summer. And one of the first classes I took had something to do with school library administration, and the assignment was to write a little essay about why I wanted to be a librarian. And I was angry because I was away from my husband and all that. And I was sitting there typing away, and I said to Mom B, is it all right for me just to tell them the only reason I'm here is because they're paying my way? And she said, Neysa, when you were in high school, that's all you ever wanted to be, was a librarian. And she was right, because as an only child with a working mother, I lived in the library. They let me move up to the adult collection when I was only 13 years old because I'd read everything there was in the children's collection. And, that thing, she was right, but I had kind of forgotten it. And fortunately, the right door opened. Then that's it.
Well, back up a little bit too. Then, what kind of work did she do, your mother?
Oh, my mother was a stenographer for the Standard Oil Company when she died in Huron, South Dakota.
So what brought you to Stillwater then?
Well, I had been a school library supervisor in the Newton schools. That was the last position I had there. And I had administrators who were very encouraging for me to go on with administration. In fact, I was the only woman administrator in the central office, of course, at that time. So I decided to go for my doctorate because I was going to be a superintendent of schools. I assured in my own mind that I could do as well as any I'd ever had. And I had a friend who was the head of the dean of the Emporia State College of Education. And I was over 40. And it is not easy to get into a doctoral program when one's over 40. And he recommended me to Homer Sorensen and out to Boulder. And I interviewed with Homer Sorensen, and he accepted me as a potential student. Then I applied for a graduate assistantship. Roscoe Rouse He gave me one by mail, a 3/4 time assistantship. And so I I actually took classes during the summer of '68.
Here on
Then,
campus?
yes, on campus. Those are the first classes I took the program. And then I thought, well, I need to get my year of residency over with. So that's when I applied for the graduate assistantship in the School of Library Science. And I came down to see Gene Post, who was my advisor, and talked to him about it. And he said, you have a 3/4 time assistantship, which paid something like $275 a month. And I said, yes. And he said, well, you can only carry 6 hours. And I looked at him and I said, I can't afford it. I can't afford to stay here for that kind of pay. And he said, you know, there's a position open over there in the library that your qualifications fit very well for. He said, why don't you call Roscoe Rouse and ask him if you could apply for it, which I did. And Roscoe, of course, diligently looked over my credentials again and whatever he did, but I was given the position. And I think I lucked out. I had school library supervisory experience and developed elementary libraries in our school system. But it was September and the position wasn't filled. And I think that helped. So that's how I got here.
So you worked and then took classes as well?
And I still could only take 6 hours.
Did you get your degree?
Yes, I have my doctorate in '74.
From OSU?
Mm-hmm.
Right. That's not on my notes.
Oh,
So that's
well,
good.
we've gotten through that one, haven't we?
And then you chose to leave?
Well, I had planned to go back, and I had not planned to stay here quite that long, but it was, I did have a very interesting position, and it was certainly paying the bills, and I could go home every weekend, and I did have a month's vacation, that sort of thing. No, I started looking for positions. I was offered one at Oral Roberts, but I didn't think I'd fit Oral Roberts very well. And then at home, I was applying for positions that opened up in libraries and school administration. And it was just sort of feeling. And one day, my former superintendent called and said, Neysa, we have a brand new library, public library, and they need a librarian. And I think you ought to consider applying. Well, in the 4 years that I was here, Ann Hoyt, who was the director who followed me, she was teaching library science, had been a school, elementary, and a public librarian, a library science teacher. And she was always telling me, as she understood me, you would really like being a public librarian. So I thought, well, when Nelson called me, all right, I'll look into it, and I got it. So my last 17 years in the field of librarianship was fun.
Public library?
I enjoyed it because there's not all that bureaucratic nonsense that goes on in the public schools and academia and all that sort of thing. You have to be creative, but financially you have to get pretty creative. It was fun. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, so they were here then you went there for 17, and then what?
I retired.
Retired. Well, while you were here, did you have to do any grants to get any programs started?
Yes, and I, unfortunately, that I do not have good long-term memory. It's not short-term as do it either, but I did have a grant that brought to the campus at those times, I was trying to remember what we called them. They were like seminars, but there was an institute that brought the audiovisual and the librarian teams from public schools. And we had resource people who worked with the development of the focus and programs of school library programs at that time. And it was an interesting period because this was after the Title II, in fact, that's how I became a school library supervisor. I was in the classroom, which is another story, but I was in the classroom and they didn't have any MLSs except me. And they asked me if I would come over and direct and implement the Title II program, which was the building and development of the facilities and the materials and the programs for the elementary libraries. And we had 2 junior highs and a senior high library that were doing pretty well. We've brought in some new people, and lots of exciting things happened after Title II because there were federal funds to provide for the materials. So that's why I became a library supervisor, really, I guess, because they didn't have everybody else there. But I fortunately had an excellent superintendent.
How much was the grant? Do you remember?
But the one here, and that was why, of course, I wanted that kind of a grant, because it is so important in the public schools or private schools, whatever kind of a school it is, even in a university setting, that the administrators really understand the role of a library media center and the importance of it in the educational process. And then the teams, who are very often an audiovisual department, which in this case was separate, except for Della, who had materials, and the library, which was more print oriented at that time, for them to understand and work as a team. So that's what we had. I don't remember, but it paid for a number of teams that came here. We had a couple from Puerto Rico.
That's substantial then.
Yeah, yes. I mean, they had to provide their own transportation, but they paid for the on-campus experience.
So you were the second person to lead CML?
Della Thomas is the one that created it. And she started it in 1957, and I came in. I was 12 years old. If I came in 69, wow, I was 12 years old. She was very gracious to me. Della was an awesome person with a great vision. And then Ann Hoyt, who was teaching library science, took my place. And there were 3 more, Donna, and then there were 2 in there who I do not know, and then Donna again.
Well, what were the interesting books at that time? Do you remember if students were focused on? They may or may not pop to mind, but.
Well, of course, we encourage it. No, I don't. I mean, can't think of titles right off.
And where was it then? Where was the library?
Oh, the CML was on the 5th floor.
Of this building?
This building, 5th floor. There's a corner up there. And I think that was the second place it was. I think it was developed or started in some of the glassed-in enclosure. But, of course, Della Thomas was an aggressive, gung-ho gal, and she that outgrew that space. and my understanding is that it was moved out of there because of an asbestos problem.
That sounds right.
Mm-hmm. And then, of course, we were teaching library science classes here. And the library science students used it because it had all of the selection tools that school librarians needed. I mean, it was a laboratory. It really was. A curriculum materials laboratory for teachers and students.
Did you teach classes yourself?
Roscoe Rels let me teach storytelling.
I bet that was fun, wasn't it?
Oh, I enjoyed it. It was something I wanted to do. I liked to do it, and it fit in. And the students actually did storytelling in daycare centers, and even we did a few on cable television because I happened to have a friend that was doing talk shows on the local cable channel, and she let me have some of my storytellers come down there, and we had little groups of children from some of the daycare centers.
I don't think they do that anymore.
No, I think it was gone when I left.
So what was campus like then? Do you have memories about
No, I think all I did was come to work and go home. I didn't go to classes. That was it, really.
How homecoming? Anything special
Oh,
about
heavens,
homecoming?
no. No. You have to remember I had a family.
Right.
Well, my son was actually he graduated from college while I was here and was working. He graduated from K-State and he was working out in western Kansas. But I did have a husband at home. I had to go home and get a week's worth of cooking done for.
So you had one child then?
Yes.
One child. Okay, and then let me back up. I was going to ask you about your first name.
Oh,
The
my
story
first
about
name.
About Neysa.
Well, I told you early on that I was born out in the middle of sagebrush. My father and mother had homesteaded, and there was a midwife that attended my mother. And my mother was absolutely sure I was going to be a boy. And here, this child was a girl, and she had no names. And one of the neighbors that was a rancher's wife, and when they were good friends, knew Neysa McMahon, who was a portrait artist. She did portraits for McCall's magazine, and I know you're far too young to know about McCall's magazine, but it was an exemplary periodical. And she also was a contemporary of Dorothy Parker, Alexander Wolcott, Moss Hart, some of those people in the New York Round Table. And she just told my mother about the name Neysa, and that's it.
It's very pretty.
Mm-hmm.
Very pretty.
Thank you.
Donna had asked me to ask you about a couple of other things too, so we'll switch gears a little bit. She wanted to know if there were any textbooks were part of the collection or not.
Yes. One of the things that Della did not have all that quippy a budget, but she had wonderful contacts and was able to get a lot of review books, which helped build the K-12 collection. She also had a lot of professional materials for teachers and librarians, and she was able to work out with the textbook companies having textbook sets here, sets of textbooks for review and approval, because textbook companies wanted the school administrators or whatever they were, curriculum directors, if it was a big enough school, to evaluate the textbooks and use them in their schools. And so she had this library of textbooks, and as far as I know, they were coming by the time I was here. They were all freebies, what we call the freebies.
Yep. Those are always good.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then she was asking what your typical day would be like.
In the CML?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, it just depended. We scheduled, of course, we would schedule with the library science faculty. The library science faculty was wonderful to work with. Their classes would come in, and then there were the days that I had storytelling, and of course there were always those meetings. I was on the, whatever it's called, the council, library council, as a department head. We'd have those meetings. Selection, I spent a lot of time reading selection materials, because the collection that I was, quote, responsible for was so much broader than anything that I'd ever dealt with in the public schools. When I was a high school librarian, it was high school materials, and then I was pretty much responsible for the development of the elementary library programs, because we were just beginning to hire qualified librarians for contact with the students, and the high school teachers took their own. So I remembered that. We did many little blurbs of all the books that we had in and sent to the College of Education faculty. Gee, do you know how long ago that was?
You're doing fine. You're doing great.
I do know I came to work every day at 8 o'clock.
At 8 and stayed till
5.
Till 5.
Mm-hmm. Right. And
they had faculty status then too?
I had assistant professorship.
Okay. Oh, yeah, still.
That was primarily thanks to Della, I'm sure. Well, I think things have changed a lot. Well, what was that? If I left here in 73, that's 4 years ago, something like that. A lot happens in 34 years, and all of it is not good.
Most of it is, I'd say.
Well, yes.
Well, how did you have to interact with Roscoe Rouse very often?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Roscoe was, and he was a good supporter. Of course, as any administrator, he worked under a lot of pressure to please all of the departments of the colleges of the university and the people that we served. The library was open 24 hours a day. Yes,
Okay.
it was. 365 days a year.
That doesn't happen. Okay.
No, I mean, it was, part of that was Edmund Lowe's take on things because he believed this was an important place for students to be all the time. But Roscoe, of course, maintained that kind of a schedule. He had an excellent staff, wonderful people here to work with. He really did. And I enjoyed all of them, and there are not too many left, but Beth Holland, Jill Holmes and I, because she was the education librarian, and I enjoyed working, and Heather, Lloyd was, of course, we also had good times together, too.
Were you
And
a member?
Coming was here.
She's still here, so maybe we'll hook up with her today. Were you a member of OLA, Oklahoma Library?
Oh, yes. I was also chairman of the Sequoia Book Award Committee.
Oh, okay.
And see, The Man in the Box was the winner of the Sequoia Book Award the first year that actually I was only there 2 years because I left. I mean, I managed to become chairman.
Pretty quick.
Well, really. But Oklahoma's pretty open. I need to get rid of my watch. It's going to have all those little clicks on there. The Man in the Box, and unfortunately I don't remember the name of it, was probably one of the few books that she wrote and had been a school librarian. And it's a wonderful book, really is, about a prisoner in Vietnam.
I haven't heard of it. I'll have to check it out.
Yeah.
Well, when you started working in the public library, did you do storytelling?
Oh, yes.
Yourself?
Well, I had children's librarians, but when they were on vacation and that sort of thing, yes, I did.
Volunteered quickly.
I enjoyed it.
That would be the fun part, I think, of being a school librarian, to be storytelling. Mm-hmm. And she wanted to know about, well, we already asked where popular books were, and we really don't know. You wrote a grant, and you taught some library school classes.
I would say probably, well, of course, our picture book collection was always Caldecott Awards and Caldecott Potentials and Newbery Award. Those were the focus of our children and youth collection.
Well, your PhD was in education, or was it in?
Educational administration. No, it was actually, well, I was here because I was going to become a superintendent of schools, remember. But the curriculum, I had several hours of curriculum. And I also had Paul Johnson, who was from the town where our farm was near, was my curriculum instructor. And it was great working with him. You know, he just encouraged me to explore how the curriculum of a public school would coordinate with the library program. I had some neat things happening.
Did you go through graduation ceremony?
Nope.
No.
I was back in Kansas and I was working. I did have to take a week off to finish my dissertation after I took my new job. I just absolutely wasn't able to quite finish it up. That part was probably a mistake for me to jump in because I was in the process of writing it. And I did take, I think it was about a week off to polish it up so that I could get it published, and then came back and took my morals.
And you were in your 40s at that time?
No, I was older than that.
Oh, no, 40s were MLS.
74. I finished in 73. I was I was 51.
Well, that's even harder to be that age and
Right.
doing a PhD.
And if people hadn't given me a chance, it probably would never have happened. And the encouragement, really.
Were you one of the few women in the program, or were there pretty
I
balanced?
certainly was probably one of the few at my age. There were many that, not as many women today. My study groups, for instance, were all men, especially in statistics, because statistics was almost a downer for me. In fact, we had a professor by the name of Means that one day was looking at me, I know he was, saying that when people are past 35, it is very difficult for them to understand the concepts of statistics. That didn't help.
And was he over 35 himself?
I don't know. I don't think he was quite there yet. Or maybe he was the exception.
But you passed.
Well, yes, I did. I took 2 classes. The next professor I did a little better under. He didn't intimidate me as much as me instead.
Well, what did you do your dissertation on?
It's a long title, but basically it was to study schools in Kansas, school systems that had school library supervisors. There were about 26, and those school systems with elementary library programs without supervisors, to see the impact on services and program and development, and whether there was the advantages of administrators. I remember one of the conclusions was that there were better collections, better programs. I mean, having an administrators, but that the services, direct services within the school seemed to be better in those that didn't have a library supervisor.
That's
But
interesting.
there was but that was what it was.
And
The centralized services would speed up processes of collection and processing and getting those things out to the schools. And we had centers that developed the materials a teacher needed to have something created, laminated or created. We did that in the central what would be the central office, the library supervisor's position. Whereas in those schools that didn't have that kind of thing, the teacher or the librarian in this case would have to do all of that kind of thing herself.
And you never made it to being a superintendent, huh?
No, but that was fine. Regrets, huh? No, I really didn't mind at all.
Is this the first time you've been back on campus?
No, I've been back. The last time I was really here was in '96 when the CML moved to Willard. That was in '96.
7 years.
And I was back here in '97 for a wedding, but I don't remember that I came on campus. I was here for the wedding. And I don't think I've been back here since then. At least I can't recall of any reason that I was back. So,
is your blood still just a little bit orange?
Oh yes.
Just a little bit?
I have, yes.
Just a little bit. That's the question with
when
state
KU
schools.
and O State play, naturally I'm just looking for the Cowboys to mow them down.
That's interesting too. I think how you ended up here is a neat story too. Did you have a mentor? Someone that
on campus, you mean?
Or before either?
I had a lot of mentors. I really did. I had mentors in professional organizations that encouraged me to be involved and gave me many opportunities. I had mentors here. I had mentors at Emporia State. I had mentors in high school. I mean, there was always someone that was there that would encourage me. And, yes, I have a lifelong list of them.
You're lucky then.
Yes, I am.
Same thing seemed to have just...
And, right, and the other thing, I think of when doors opened for me, because I actually had an opportunity to become I was doing consulting for the F.E. Compton Company, and the university liked that, because I was representing the university and traveling to college campuses and education departments for F.E. Compton, who paid the bill. It was just that I got to take some time off from the CML to do it. And they wanted me to come to work for them. My husband and I went to Chicago, and I had a friend who was at Governor's State University, who was his assistant vice president. I mean, he was second in command there. And, well, he was a friend of the family. Charlie went to talk to them about getting a job with them, and we would have had to sell a farm, or, well, we wouldn't have sold the farm. We would have, because that wouldn't have been very practical. When I came home and I saw grass, and I thought, why in the world would I want to move to Chicago? I would never see a blade of grass again. So I turned it down. And that was probably, I think I had one more year here. I can't remember for sure when it was. But it was things like that. And, well, like I told you, there were Roberts, and there was another position out in western Kansas that didn't work out simply because the men who would have hired me left. It's a regional system. We have regional systems in Kansas. Became a state librarian, and so he called and canceled the interview. Well, of course, much later I was on the Library Network board and worked with him very closely, and I would always tease him about, do you realize that where I would have been if, however, I did work with him. So, and it was a fluke. Really, it was kind of a fluke, because it would have been something. I didn't particularly want to go to western Kansas, but it was just like when Nelson called me about this public library job. Before I came here, the library position had opened up, and my superintendent at that time said, Neysa, if you want that job, you can have it, but it doesn't pay anything. So I thought, and there's an old Carnegie building. And,
cool, though. They're nice now, though.
well, yes, but well, he's right. I didn't want it. I mean, it wasn't. It was, and then meeting Ann Hyde, because Ann saw the kind of thing that I believed in libraries, the passions I had, and my frustrations with some of the things that those restrictions and that sort of thing. And she instilled in me this desire to try the public library. I probably wouldn't have without. So Ann mentored me, Nelson mentored me. I mean, there were a lot of people who did. And Dr. Sorensen was so good to me. I know a lot of people had no idea how I think they felt that he distanced himself from people. He was dean of the College of Education. And here he looked at my record and believed Alex when Alex said, you ought to give her a chance, and he did. And when I had something I needed to discuss with him, the door was open. Oh. Okay.
All those woven together have created
All
a
of
nice
this.
end product, huh?
That's right. Good or bad, it's here. People do make a difference in our lives.
Yes, they do.
I think one of the things we didn't talk about was the importance of the non-print collection in the CML, because this is when libraries were emerging from being print centers into non-print centers, and how important those non-print materials were. And at that time, I was thinking about it because I was going to mention it today, although I think I probably won't, was if you were born in, 60, you would have no idea what the kinds of non-print materials were in the school libraries. It was film strips and slides and dioramas, tapes, records. We had records on sex education, for instance. They're published by the Lutheran Church, whatever it is that the Lutheran Church has, that arm of education. Homemade materials. There was just the beginning of film coming out. It was just emerging. And look what's happened since then. In the public libraries, children's department, we had a toy library. And of course, naturally, we had early on the TI computer 4K with all of these little learning modules. We had this in the children's library. That was in the 70s. They see the PC didn't really hit, except for that was a PC, but which took basic programming, and you had these a monitor and this keyboard and all of these learning materials. And we had children by the hour. Cable came in. We had access to cable. And I remember one young man we had who was a discipline problem in the junior high. And his home life was miserable. He lived in the public library days because he was kicked out of school. And Chris would sit there and watch cable TV and go over and play on the computers and things like that. And never disrupted anything, but at least, of course, he should have been in a school learning instead of being kicked out. But, and he, I'd give anything to what happened to him now. The last time I saw him, he came in, he all dressed up in a suit, and he was about 14 years old. But things like that happen. Also, we had a man who used to come in every summer and buy his pants at the Goodwill and cut them off and sit there and sew hymns in his shorts.
In the library.
In the library, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Worthington.
Brought his own needle and thread with him.
Yes, oh yes. We didn't have to furnish needle and thread.
Well, it's a community center for sure then if
Oh,
they
yes.
get comfortable doing that.
Well, right. And it's, of course I retired in 89, so you see it's been 18 years since I've been there. But it's fun to go back and see that the print world, the world of books is still alive in the public library. We have book discussion groups there that will have 30 and 35 people, adults. They have youth involvement in book discussions, book clubs. And then, of course, the children's department has great story times and programs. We had a program for adults, for parents. At the same time, the children were in story
How big
time.
of a town is this?
17,000.
Good.
And all of those things are continuing, or they're changing. They're changing, but that they should. The public library world is exciting. I haven't been in the few school libraries I've been in, the small communities, I am always disappointed in the collections and being told we can't afford these periodicals and the emphasis on online searching, that sort of thing. I mean, there's a place for both.
And it takes money to have both, too, though, so.
Well, sometimes it's a cop-out.
Do you have any special memories from your time here that you want to make sure we get on tape? Any fun stories or anything that comes to mind?
I think I probably covered it. I mean, we had great times at ALA and OLA and
Did the library have social events for?
I don't remember that the library did. Our little group did.
Mm-hmm.
We used to have, I guess what you'd call a potluck supper events, and we got together. We had that little niche of Vicki Phillips, and that's before Vicki was married, and Jill and Heather, and
Vicky's still here, so we get to see her today, I'd say.
Right. It was the younger set let me become a part of their set because they were all considerably younger than I was.
Or you're very easy to talk to, so I'm sure that was part of it.
Well, but they were open, and that's the important thing. People are open to it, and I like the campuses. I do. I like being on college campuses. I really did. If I didn't have to walk all those steps from the parking lot, or whatever you want to call it, parking garage.
So where did you live when you were here? If you just
I had an apartment over on Knob Block. I can't remember we just went over there.
So within walking distance.
No, I left my car there. Got my car, which is practically by a new sideswiped in the parking lot one time, but that was about all the bad that happened. Gas was only 25 cents a gallon.
And so what was your salary then? Do you roughly?
Oh, around 9,000.
25 cents a gallon. It was $2.69 this morning.
So based on that, if I were working, I should have a salary of 90,000, right? It should be 10 times more. Or wait, let's see. Wait a minute. It is 10 times. 10 times 25 at least. It's more than that. Well, I doubt that there's anybody around here making 90, not except maybe the director.
Yeah, the deans and associate deans, maybe. It's not us regular.
Not in special collections, that's for sure.
No, not by any means. Anything else you want me to ask or cover?
Well, not unless what kinds of things is it that you really want for this collection?
We're just doing various things, people's stories about being on campus and different time periods to see how campus has changed.
Well, it has.
And the library front has changed just a little bit since you're with the new plaza.
Of course, there are some other people I should mention, and that was Carolyn Croft Baird, who was a delightful person with whom to work. Nancy Amos.
Ever heard that name?
Carolyn Croft Baird? Mm-hmm. Well, Carolyn was teaching library science classes, and she then got her doctorate here and was very active in supervisory programs of student teachers. And she and her husband, John, did service education programs. I remember things like in Japan. Mm-hmm. She's going to be we'll call it the keynoter at the CML celebration this afternoon. Mm-hmm. Nancy Amos was head of the department. She's one of those characters. Mm-hmm. You saw what you got. I mean, she didn't put on any errors. This was Nancy, and this is what she believed.
So you interacted quite a lot with the faculty then?
Well, the library science faculty was on the 5th floor. Library science classes were taught up there.
Okay.
And of course, children's literature, young adult literature, cataloging. Ann Hoyt, who was the next director, was an amazing cataloging teacher. I mean, she knew her stuff. All of the administration classes, selection of materials. I can't even remember the kinds of library science classes that were taught then. I can't even remember the ones I took. But that was going on the 5th floor. There were classrooms up there.
I don't know much about that program too. When it stopped? When did they stop doing that?
It was still going when I left, and I honestly couldn't tell you. I mean, I knew that it was phased out, and I'm not sure what was going on behind the scenes that brought that about.
Did the University of Oklahoma have theirs at that time too?
This was an undergraduate program.
Okay.
It was an undergraduate program, and there was very definitely a place for it. Of course, we had MLS programs in almost every state. Denver had one, Oklahoma, OU, Emporia, Now, I think Emporia, I don't think Colorado has one. I think Emporia is one of the few that survived an ALA accreditation.
Okay.
I mean, you could still have the program, you just wouldn't have the accreditation.
Right.
But this was an undergraduate program, and somehow I think there's still a place for the undergraduate program, because one doesn't have to have an MLS in every school library, or even every public library, because public libraries, the small public libraries, have a certification program for people who don't even have many college credits, sometimes don't have any college credits. But it was phased out. Carolyn could tell the story. You ought to interview Carolyn.
We should. Sounds like we
You
should.
really should.
Wonder where she lives now.
She lives here.
Oh, that would be easy to do then. Okay.
It's John and Carolyn Baird. They live out, don't ask me.
That's okay.
They live out that way. I will see her at noon. We're having lunch. I will tell her.
So she retired from here, you guess?
She's retired. Oh yes, and she remembers all of these people and all of these things, and she was here. I mean, she tells me things as if I'm supposed to remember them. I mean, that was a wonderful time in my life, but lots of things have happened since then.
It's a stepping stone.
And I didn't do much journaling then. I don't now. I'm sporadic journal, but I do think that people should become journalers. And I encourage my younger generation, my grandnephews and stuff, to journal. I have one that is doing a great job of it. He's going to run in the cross country in the morning. But it is true. People who journal will keep track of things better.
Well, I know it would help. me anyway. I forget a lot of things too. My last question I usually ask people, and it's kind of a tough one. So, when history's written about you, what would you like for it to say?
She enjoyed living. I did. I enjoyed living, and I enjoyed the people in my life.
And seeing grass.
And seeing grass, yes. Seeing grass. Yes. I think so. I mean, I have a lot of love from a lot of people. And I hope I was worthy of it.
I'd say you are.
Thank you.
I've heard stories that would confirm that, yes.
Oh, gee, I have a good PR network out there, don't I? Yeah, it pays.
Well, did your husband have a college education?
He had an associate degree. I mean, he didn't go to college. Of course, he graduated from high school in 1933 and went to a business college and got whatever degrees the business colleges. And he had to come back he was in California, come back to take over the farm because his father was battling cancer. And he stayed with it, and he was a good farmer. And he was one of the things that I happen to be doing today is I'm going to talk about how important it is to instill lifelong learning, the desire for lifelong learning in students, and the role of library media centers, or in this case, a CML, in doing that. And I think of Charlie as one of the real models of lifelong learning, because he constantly kept himself informed on agriculture trends. And when he died, I still haven't cleaned out all the file drawers of all these Kansas State Extension pamphlets on everything under the sun. From how to get rid of carpenter ants to no-till farming programs. And so that it is important. It isn't that's necessarily an indicative that because a person has a college degree that they're educated.
That's true. What kind of farm did he do?
Oh, we had cattle and hogs and sheep and wheat and milo, and I had little baby lambs in my kitchen. In fact, we have a movie when Terry was born. when we came home from the hospital, and I'd been feeding 3 lambs as best as a pregnant woman can. And when we walked in, Charlie was carrying Terry in, and here came the 3 little lambs right behind us, running ahead in the kitchen because they wanted to get their bottles. And Terry actually bought 2 cars with his sheep projects and FFA. He was a state farmer, and he graduated from K-State and spent 15 years working for the federal credit system, but he always wanted to farm, and he was farming. And after 15 years, Charlie gave up. He had wanted Terry, just didn't. He wanted him to stay in that corporate world where there was a salary and a pension plan, and you got off work at 5 o'clock, and Terry chose the 19-hour days. And this, I don't think needs to be on it, but
no, it's fine.
I got here about 4 o'clock Wednesday because I was going to go see Carolyn, and I got this call on my cell phone. Mom, where are you? Well, I'm in Oklahoma. Oh, I forgot. I wondered if you could move me from one field to another. Well, then, the next morning, the phone rings again. Oh, I forgot you were in Oklahoma. I was going to ask you if you... But it is soybean and milo harvest right now, and wheat planting, and he has a lot of acreage. There's a lot.
So he's ended up with the family farm then?
Yes, he moved to the farm in '86, and we moved to town.
Staying in the family a long time then, hasn't
Well, yes, it has. Well, his Charlie's parents are the ones that acquired the farm.
How many acres are we talking about?
Terry Farm's around 2,000, I think, something like that. I mean, I could figure it out. I don't know how much of it's cropland.
19 hours a day every day, or just during
I
harvest
think
and planting time?
It can be when you have cattle. Terry has cattle. Now we had cattle and we had hogs and we had sheep. Actually, the day I was married, we were married. Well, that's another story, but
that's okay.
We were married on a Easter weekend, and because the minister.
19 what?
Oh well, no, it's another story, and it isn't for taping, but it is. It's a fun story. We came to the farm, and the first thing we did was go to town and get 500 baby chicks. On my first day of marriage.
Forget the honeymoon.
I never did like chickens. I still really am not that fond of eating it. I do, but and of course I still smell all those chickens that we butchered. And I was really a city girl. I had a lot to learn. Actually, I learned to drive a tractor with what was called I've forgotten. It was a thing that scooped the hay up. And Charlie had German prisoners working for him when I was doing this, because we had a satellite German prisoner camp in Peabody.
Oh, interesting.
And this makes me mad that I can't think of the name of that implement, but I learned to fly an airplane and drive a tractor before I learned to drive a car.
The airplane to do crop dusting or just?
Oh, no, there was a civilian pilot training program in college, and I was the only woman in the first program. And that's how I learned to fly.
And this was where?
At Emporia State. Mm-hmm. And that would have been in 40. And I didn't get a driver's license until about 46 or 47.
So you haven't been in a plane behind the wheel in a while.
No. Now the last time I flew was in the 60s.
Well, still.
My son learned to fly and had a plane, but he never let his mother in it. It's like He is a vet, and he doesn't let his mother drive it either.
What prompted you to try to learn to do the plane though?
This is another one of those
being the only
mentors
woman?
in my life. We had a woman pilot instructor, and she became a friend of the family, and she was another one of my mentors. I was senior in high school, and I wanted to be a pilot like Ruth, and there's opportunity presented itself. They wanted to train these young people to become civilian pilots, and that's it.
And your parents were okay with you learning?
Oh yes, oh yes.
Encouraging too. That's good.
Mm.
Anything else? Anything else you want to say?
No. Well,
Go as long as you want.
I doubt very much that it'll help the collection that much. The rest of it.
Now this is great. This is it's really good, and it's women too, and it's what you've been able to do, being the minorities in some cases. Like
and that's another thing. It was a lot of these things happened at a time when women were not given the opportunity to do things. That again, I was very fortunate that I was given administrative responsibilities. There had been an earlier period in public schools where women were elementary principals. Then that was not happening when I went into education. I went back into education in '54. And it didn't really start again until a little after, I would say probably in the '70s. It was almost in the late '70s before there were superintendents in Kansas that were women. And of course, the principals. It would have been the late '60s, early '70s that there were more secondary women principals. And now there are quite a few secondary and even elementary principals.
And it's probably still more heavily.
Oh yes, well it's like it is in this country in which women are supposed to have equal status. We're far behind other countries. Well, look at our representation in state legislatures, and on a national level.
That's my other project that I'm doing. Mm-hmm. Women legislators in Oklahoma.
Oh, really? Mm-hmm. Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, we can talk a little bit offline.
And it's like Emporia State has Joyce Davis, who was here. Well,
there's been less than 100 over the 100 years. And there's about 60 that I've been able to find. I've interviewed 16, and I've got 6 or 7 more lined up, and then I'll go to the next round. So hopefully we'll get to hear their stories.
Well, even at local levels, there are not as many women.
We're going to change that.
And of course, one thing I remember about Oklahoma is it didn't become a state till 1907. Mm-hmm. So many of the kinds of things that happen socially and politically, they sort of have to metamorphosize and grow and change. Where Kansas had all those years ahead of it, so that there is something about, it's like a baby has to grow up, a state has to grow up and get confidence in itself, and when it has confidence in itself, then it will embrace these kinds of changes. Oklahoma has a ways to go. This would be what, the 100th year? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Where other states are celebrating 150, well, some in the 200s and all. Mm-hmm. But it was just something that I realized one day, because when I came down here, politically, this state seemed awfully backward to me, politically. Yeah, I mean, I don't mean to be critical of it, but it's just, I don't understand it. There was a lot of this old boy cronyism and, that sort of thing. And when I realized it, I thought, oh yes, this state is still going through these growing pains. It's just fairly new compared to what's happening in other places, like in Maine, which was one of the first to have a woman senator, things like that.
Well, we do have a female lieutenant governor
Good.
this year.
I don't keep up too well with Oklahoma
I wouldn't
politics.
normally either, but I have to with my project.
With this project, I think that's going to be most interesting. You've had some women in Stillwater, haven't you, that were
There's been two.
Furnace.
Cedric, S-H-E.
Oh, because I knew her.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, she's still around. I haven't been able to talk to her yet, but she's on my list.
And then I think you had some locally, too.
Or there's a Lee Denny from Cushing, which is
Mm-hmm.
she's coming up in a couple of weeks to do one in this room, too, so it'll be interesting. I'm learning.
Mm-hmm. And then college campuses, are there any women presidents?
In Oklahoma, I think there are maybe some of the smaller ones. I don't know. I mean, right now the interim is a female.
Oh.
The provost is doing the interim president for here.
Mm-hmm. And now your department heads here have been a good balance.
Mm-hmm.
And really, there's been, even I know when I was here all those many years ago, there was a good balance of women and men.
Well, I think, and I may be mistaken on this too, that the dean of the library is a woman now. And she may be the first, I don't know. I don't know if there was, how far back Roscoe, and then before him was Edmund Lowe, or Edmund King Lowe.
Right.
I don't know who was.
Well, they were all men. I think there were.
Probably. So
I think there were three. There was a Johnson in there.
Well, Ed was before this Johnson. Ed Johnson was before Sheila.
Right, and then there's somebody else. There's another man somewhere, I think, and then whoever this is, right?
Mm. Curious. Are we done?
Yes.
Thank
what am I
you
going to
so
do
much.
about my clicking watch? Do you want to start over?
No.
I kept hitting.
I need to thank you for coming today and
Tanya,
sharing
yes.
your stories.